Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us for today's webinar, Succession Planning and the Development of Your High Potentials. My name is Jessica. I'm on the marketing team with Biz Library, and I'll be the host for today's session. Before we get started, I want to go through just a couple of housekeeping items. First, what you should see on your screen. On the left-hand side of the screen, this is the webinar viewer, so this is where you'll see the content that we're sharing with you today. On the right-hand side of the screen, this is the control panel. So this is where you can join the audio portion of today's webinar, and you can also communicate with us through the question box. The default mode for the control panel is for it to collapse. If you want to open the control panel back up, simply click the orange box with the white arrow in it, and it'll expand for you. All of today's attendees are in listen-only mode. You can join the audio portion of today's webinar either through the teleconference line. You can also listen through your speakers. If you're going to listen through your speakers, I recommend either using a pair of headphones or a headset to get the best audio quality. We like to keep things pretty informal, so if you have any questions or discussion points throughout today's session, feel free to send those over through the question box that's located within the control panel. Try to weave the questions in as it relates to what we're discussing in the webinar, and then I'll also leave some time at the end for Q&A. I am recording today's webinar, so I'll make a link to the webinar recording, as well as the slides and follow-up information available on our website at bizlibrary.com/bizblog. If you'd like to download the slides for today before we get started, I put a link to those in the chat panel on the right-hand side of your screen. You should have also received a link to the slide in the reminder email that you received this morning. Happy to say that today's session has been pre-approved for 1 hour CE credit for all of you HR professionals attending. I'll make a link to the completion certificate available at the end of today's webinar. I'll also email out a link to the completion certificate to all of today's attendees and a follow-up email that we receive within 24 hours. That email will come through GoToWebinar, so make sure that you have that as an approved email address so it's not going to your spam folder. The most important thing is the program ID number. That's what you'll need to record with HRCI. If you'd like more information on certification or recertification, I encourage you to visit hrci.org. Again, my name is Jessica. I'm on the marketing team with Biz Library. Graduated from the University of Missouri-Columbia with a degree in journalism. I've been working in the training and development industry now for about 5 years. I'm very active in social media, so I tweet on behalf of Biz Library at Biz Library and also at my own Twitter account. I'm also pretty active on LinkedIn, so I like to share a lot of articles and discussion points around training and development, human resources, and marketing in general. So if you're on either of those networks, social networks, I'd love it if you'd reach out and connect. Presenting with us today is Chris Osborne. Chris is the VP of Marketing for Biz Library. Chris has also worked in a consulting capacity with a Paris-based leadership development consulting firm where he helped organizations design and implement leadership and executive development programs. He's been performing learning development and training functions formally since 2000 and informally for organizations since 1987. He's also taught courses on conflict resolution and discrimination in the HR management program at WashU in St. Louis. Prior to Chris's move into the business sector, he practiced law in the areas of labor, employment, and business litigation for over 12 years. He graduated from WashU School of Law with honors in 1987. So here at Biz Library, we kindly refer to Chris as a recovering lawyer. Chris is also active in social media, so you can find him on Twitter at Chris Osborne STL, and he's also on LinkedIn. Just to give you a little bit of background on Biz Library, Biz Library is a leading provider of online employee training and e-learning solutions. Our award-winning content library contains more than 7,000 online employee training videos covering more than 25 different topic areas. Biz Library's LMS, or Learning Management System, and social learning technology platform help improve and manage employee learning. All right, so enough about us. I have a quick poll question to tee things up for today, so you should see the poll pop up on your screen in just a minute. All right, so what is your most pressing concern about your next generation of leaders? Is it A, we haven't identified high potentials, B, skill gaps, C, no development plan in place, D, no resources to develop our leaders, or E, something else?
Hey Jessica, how you doing?
Hey Chris, I'm great. How are you?
I'm good.
Good.
Good. Very happy to have such a large gathering for today's webinar. This is great.
Yeah, it's a popular topic area.
Well, for good reason. It's an important topic, too. I mean, we'll talk about the business case for it as we go through, but this is a subject that I'm very passionate about and have been very committed to for a long time. So very, very happy to see so many people share my interest in this subject matter. It's good.
All right, I'll give it.
I love these polls too. This is one of our better ones too, because this really does get right to kind of the core of what we're getting at today. So this is, what's your most pressing concern? And it's okay if you've got something else there. We'd love to hear what that is.
Yep, I'll go ahead and close it out, share the results. And again, if you chose something else, let us know through chat. We'd be happy to kind of get a better idea of where you're at. All right, so it looks like we've got 44% said the biggest concern was no development plan in place. 24% said skill gaps. 17% haven't identified high potentials. 10% said they don't have the resources needed to develop their leaders. And then 6% said something else.
Okay, so all are legitimate, big-time pressing concerns. I mean, and regardless of where you fall in here, if you've got some blend of these or if they're all concerns, that's fine too. The point of today's webinar is to give you sort of a chance to take a deep breath and realize that that's okay. If you're interested in this subject matter and you don't have a plan in place, then what you're going to pick up from today's webinar, I hope, are some actionable things you can begin doing quickly to get a plan in place. Same thing with having identified high potentials. I think we've got some really interesting ways to sort of think about that maybe a little differently, and the skill gaps, which is an enormous issue, I think, for a lot of organizations, and maybe not one that we think about, again, in quite a way that might be most beneficial to our organizations going forward. So I've got a little different perspective for you on that. And then, of course, if you don't have resources, it's hard to do much, right? But part of it comes down to building a business case for this process, this sort of plan, this kind of initiative. Because if you can build a business case and point to bottom line results, senior leaders will commit the resources to this. And then again, like Jessica said, if it's something else, tell us what that is. We frequently, we do our best to catch sort of the big issues in these polls, but if we've missed something, let us know what that is.
Right, and I'm not really surprised that so many have cited that there's no development plan in place, because it hasn't really been a huge or pressing concern for organizations overall. It's becoming more and more of a concern just because of some of the things that we'll talk about in the webinar today, but it hasn't been a necessity to have a plan. It's been, okay, so we need to fill this position because it's open or someone's retired, but it's not been something that has really been worked into the strategic plan of the organization.
Well, you're right. That's exactly right. And so a lot of it's been ad hoc. You're right, position by position. So that's part of what we want to lay out for you as a framework to rethink that approach to it. So this is a great way to kind of get this conversation started. I love this quote. It's by Robert Fulmer, from Growing Your Company's Leaders. It's not just succession to the top. It's getting the right person in place for every job. Some of tomorrow's key jobs may not even exist now. Now we've got a couple of slides to illustrate this concept, but just let that idea wash over you for just a brief moment and think about the role of learning and development broadly, and then the role of succession planning more specifically, with this idea in mind. If learning and development, the traditional approach to learning and development has been literally sort of succession planning. It's like we're going to build replacements, build a bench strength, and we're going to prepare employees and improve their current skills to solve known problems. Nothing wrong with that. That's been the approach, a traditional approach, a best practices approach, I might add, for learning and development for a long time. But in this marketplace, this environment that we now function in, a lot of really critical jobs of tomorrow, 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, 36 months out, may not exist today. So the role of learning and development has to shift a little bit to prepare our organizations, our leaders, and our employees to acquire the skills to do jobs, perform jobs that don't exist. Now that's a different approach to learning and development, isn't it? I love this quote because it really lays out a very different strategic point of view for succession planning. It's just a really great way to start today. All right, so we want to talk about three kind of high-level objectives for today. We want to talk about best practices in succession planning and high potential development programs. And we think of these things as being very, very interrelated. We want to give you a practical model for selecting participants in a succession planning or high potential development program. And again, Jessica and I work really hard to provide a lot of practical takeaways. Theory is great. I used to do a lot of consulting. I teach graduate school. I love talking about the theory, but in the end, the theory doesn't do you any good if you can't walk away with something practical. So that's a real important piece of today's session. And then we want to give you a model for determining the targets and competencies for your program. Again, something practical, something workable that you can begin to implement. All right, so let's start with sort of this marketplace. What's happening that really highlights why we think Robert Fulmer's strategic approach, strategic framing of succession planning makes so much sense. We've got these broad market forces and trends that are buffeting every organization of every size in every market vertical around. You know, you've seen the term VUCA probably applied to describe this marketplace. And VUCA is an acronym borrowed from Special Forces training, and it stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And it really is an apt description of the market. I mean, it is volatile. It is uncertain. We don't know what's happening. It's complex, and it's not getting any simpler, and it is ambiguous. So how do we cope with this? We have to have leaders that are able to embrace complexity and ambiguity and make decisions and move our organizations forward in a market that's just different than it used to be. Again, not bad, not good, but that's just the reality. And as we see this marketplace change in terms of demographics and the rise of technology and innovation really driving business growth, we're seeing a set of competencies begin to emerge for leaders and leadership that look a little different. They may not be fundamentally different, but we're seeing a different approach to leadership that might set us up to be successful in this type of market, in this type of a workplace dominated by a new generation, millennials. In just a short period of time, millennials are going to occupy 50% of the workforce. On my team, they occupy all but me in the workforce. And I'll tell you that from very personal experience that leading a team of millennials is different. It's not bad. It's not good. It's different. And it takes a different way of thinking and a different set of competencies to master to motivate and engage and lead this generation of employees. I'll tell you, it's worth mastering, but it's different. Future job needs, likely unknown today. We just simply can't predict with any high degree of certainty what's going to happen going forward. We've got an interesting graphic, which we'll get to. Actually, it's the next slide. And then given the economic downturn, the Great Recession, we're finally kind of climbing out of it, although the recovery feels halting, and it's certainly not even across the economy. But we're beginning to see the job market firm up a little bit, and you're starting to see talented employees have job options and move around a little bit. And so organizations that had put downward pressure on benefits and pay were starting to pay that piper. Employees are starting to look around a little bit. So what are we doing to deal with all of this stuff? Okay, so this is a wonderful infographic published by LinkedIn. Jessica put this slide together. I wish I could take credit for having found this, but I can't. Jessica found it, so I'm going to let her explain what this is. But I just love what this communicates.
Right, so the idea behind this infographic is that it's, top 10 job titles that didn't exist even 5 years ago. So these aren't necessarily roles that we would consider to be leadership roles maybe, but it does show the extreme growth and the change in our organizations and what roles and job titles are necessary for organizations. So some of them you look at, like big data architect, cloud services specialist, data scientist. So are we living in an era of big data? Sure seems like it. Then you have the Zumba instructor, which probably has nothing to do with data, but it sure is fun, right? So there's all these kind of different influences in job titles that, did we have any idea that this was going to come to 5 years ago? I just got into the job market probably 5 years ago. So, it's kind of, I guess, scary. It's not really been different to me, but Chris has more experience. He's been in the market longer than I have, so it's a big difference in the pace at which things are changing.
And I've been depressed a lot longer than you too, but but Jessica's exactly right. But if you think about these specific jobs, and by the way, these are job roles as described by members of LinkedIn in their own job profiles. So this is just the growth in 5 years. And but I guarantee you, I mean, if you think of social media, there weren't marketing roles associated with social media 5 years ago, nor were there marketing roles 5 years ago that were expressly linked to digital marketing. But if you think about marketing today, particularly here at Biz Library, our entire approach to marketing is a digital inbound marketing approach. If you think about human resources today, where do you source candidates? Social media is a big part of what a lot of us are doing. And cloud services specialists, think about your IT function and how your web developers work, and think about how those jobs have changed. Well, your leaders have to be there too, and how you deal with data. So, yeah, these are specific job roles, but we need leaders that are adept and understand these big trends as well. So do you have leaders capable of leading teams in which these job roles are important? This isn't an abstraction. This is not an abstraction, okay? I said earlier, I love to talk about theory, but we were going to give you some real clear takeaways. This is as clear a takeaway as I can make this. This is not in the abstract. These jobs are real. They are here. They are important, and we have to shift our thinking, just like Fulmer talked about. We have to begin to think about preparing leaders to lead teams and perform jobs that did not exist before, that we just don't know what they're going to look like in the future. So, best practices for succession planning and really impacting the bottom line, and you can include in this high potential development. There are really 5 elements to this, and none of this is magic, none of this is mysterious, but you really need all 5 of these pieces functioning together, thought of as a cohesive whole in order to have an effective strategic succession planning initiative, program, whatever you want to call it, within your organization. First, it has to be aligned with your organization's strategic objectives, and we'll talk about how we view alignment in just a minute. You have to conduct an objective and thorough analysis of both your current and future capabilities, okay? You have to focus on potential and values, and we'll talk about those 2 pieces in some detail when we get to that. It has to be perceived as relevant and real by the participants, and all of us in this session are probably wired and dialed into sort of adult learning theory. If you think about what that tells us, adults are really, really good at applying what we teach them when they understand the connection, the direct line connection between content and learning and improve performance on the job. And that's a big part of this. We have to make sure people can make those connections, and that's true with any kind of learning plan, particularly succession planning. And last but not least, this needs to be an element of driving a culture of continuous learning and continuous development and continuous improvement. So we'll get to that when we a little bit later. But these 5 pieces are all interrelated, all support each other in very, very important ways. So we talk about alignment. And one of the things that, there's a great quote by Peter Drucker that we use in another webinar, which really is applicable here in a way, but it's really a great way to begin to get at this. And Peter Drucker says that management is doing things right. Leadership is doing the right things. The problem a lot of leaders face is figuring out what are those right things. And Jessica mentioned that I used to do a lot of leadership and organizational development consulting, and one of the consultants' standby old tools is the old-fashioned SWOT analysis. And this is actually an incredibly useful analytical tool. SWOT is an acronym that stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And when you perform a SWOT analysis as a way to begin to think through strategic alignment of a succession planning program to organizational objectives and goals, as a way of figuring out what those right things are. Remember, leaders do the right things. You can really develop really very, very clear answers. This is a great way to create a sense of clarity in this volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous world. It takes time, it takes thought, but this is a really excellent tool to simplify things in a very complex world. So strengths, at the top part of this chart, strengths and weaknesses, this is really an internal examination. So what do we do well today, and will our strengths prepare us for future success? One of the key things about succession planning is this really needs to be a future-oriented approach. We obviously need to understand where we are today, but we really want to do a continuous and relentless analysis of what do we need in the future, okay? Where are we going to be in 6 months, 18 months, 24 months as an organization? Where do we see the market going? Do we see competitors emerging? Do we have leaders that can acquire new skills? Do we have leaders that are prepared to learn new things? Is this a strength? What do we do well today, and will our strengths prepare us for future success? Weaknesses, what do we do poorly, and most importantly, why? And ask yourself that question a lot when you're doing a SWOT analysis, why? You really want to get down to the real causes, sort of the core root cause of weaknesses and strengths. Get to the whys, because that's going to help you really understand sort of the strategic underpinnings of both strengths and weaknesses. Can we do less of weaknesses? What steps must we take to either improve or minimize the risks? Those are your internal focuses. Opportunities and threats are more external. So what are our greatest opportunities for growth? Is it new markets? Is it innovative new products? Are our strengths, are we internally aligned to take advantage of them, or do our weaknesses stand in the way? And then threats, where are we vulnerable? Are our biggest threats external or internal? And are our threats market-driven? Are they competition? Are they lack of talent, not the right talent? You know, again, this is a really great way to begin, like I said, to create a sense of clarity around something that can be very, very complicated. So as you do this SWOT analysis, this can really help you identify the strategic goals for a program. Look, we've got these strengths we need to leverage, weaknesses we need to address, opportunities we want to take advantage of, and threats we want to be prepared for. So you can begin to set appropriate strategic goals, not only for a succession planning program, but for your organization more broadly. So where are you going to be? Where do you want to be compared to where you are now? So this gets down to the idea of alignment. Now, you can go find some really interesting, I think, thought leadership on the concept of alignment in the business literature. And most of it will be written in sort of vague, kind of businessy sounding jargon. And I read through a lot of it, and to be perfectly honest, after I read through some of it, I was like, what does that even mean? A lot of times it sounds like, you sit down in a conference room, you do your strategic planning, and you do something like this. You say, well, we want to increase sales by 5%, so we're going to, increase our closing skills, we're going to recruit better salespeople, and we're going to do whatever else. And so now we've got alignment. We've got organizational goals, sales team goals, and we're going to set up the goals for the individual sales reps, and boom, we've got alignment, off we go. And it's sort of viewed as this kind of structural thing that you put in place and walk away from. And then everybody's expected just to kind of work within that structure. And at the end of the year, you look at your goals, and did you meet them? And everybody's kind of scratching their head at the end of the year going, wow, I thought we were aligned, and how did we miss? Only 1 in 5 American businesses successfully achieve their strategic initiatives. And mostly it's because organizations approach strategic goal alignment exactly that way. Well, alignment needs to be approached differently. Alignment needs to be approached as a continuous process whereby you are adjusting continuously the various pieces of your organization to make sure they remain in the appropriate position relative to each other. So, for instance, if the objective is to increase sales by 5%, you look at that every month. Are we on track? Are we off track? Where are we? If we want to end up with a 5% goal at the end of the year, where do we need to be each month along the way to hit that? And if we're trending ahead or behind, what adjustments do we need to make? Do we need to provide better development in this area, better development in this area? Can the marketing team help? Can the client services team help? Who can help us achieve that goal? And that requires a high degree of executive, not just support, but executive involvement to communicate clearly the basis of the goals, why the goals are important, and you're going to have a much, much better chance of making that work. Looks like we've got an interesting question, kind of a strategic question coming from Keisha. Am I reading that right, Jessica?
Yeah, so she asked, how do generational differences impact succession planning?
Oh, they don't at all. You just do everybody the same. No. Well, you wish it were that easy, wouldn't you? Just kind of put together a one-size-fits-all plan and get it out. Taken into consideration. But I think the more critical differences are individual. Everybody's going to have very specific needs and very specific development gaps, very different development strengths. And so a really great succession planning program is going to take that into consideration. We do another webinar about competency-based training, and one of the beauties of competency-based training, when it's implemented effectively, is that each individual has a clear understanding of where they are and where they want to be, so that's that gap between the current state of performance or mastery and the desired state of performance and mastery that each individual is working to fill with support from their manager and with support from the training and development team. So how you fill those gaps in employee by employee will vary. So for instance, here on the marketing team, we have a number of employees. Each one of us is in a different place in terms of learning style, commitment to learning, what we're trying to do. We have one individual here that works primarily on our website, web development. I need to understand those issues at a high level, but AJ needs to understand them at a very, very intense level. So do we need the same development plan? And that has nothing to do with generational differences. That has to do with individual needs, job role, and very specific development and knowledge requirements, plus the level of mastery needed to successfully perform the job. So that's really the way to think about it. Now, generational differences will come into play with respect to familiarity and comfort with technology tools, with social learning tools, with social, various other things. But in terms of the actual development piece of it, it's going to need to be much more specific and individualized. Jessica, was that an effective answer to that? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. One thing I might add is that the impact that generational differences are having on our organizations overall. So they're becoming much more flat, less hierarchical. So it makes succession planning a little bit different than what we've thought of in the past. It may not be that, you're in an entry-level position and then you're going through the ranks in a certain order. It may be based on your motivation and your drive. Maybe you're in this position for a long time, but you may not want to move into a management role. So I think that a huge impact is that the one that generations are having on the way that our organizations are set up and organized.
Yeah, that's a good point, and we certainly see it play out on our marketing team here. I'm not always the teacher. I'm frequently the student, and the team teaches me frequently, particularly when it has to do with technology and some of the sort of the new innovations that we're seeing in the space. So that's a really good point. So just to quickly revisit this idea of these external opportunities and threats when you're talking about sort of alignment, this is a really great set of questions to ask yourself as you're identifying these high-level strategic goals. And as you begin to identify where you're going to target, from an organizational perspective, once you hone in on these, again, you do not just set it up at strategic planning and walk away. These are things that you're continuously working to tweak and stay on top of on a weekly, monthly basis, so you're making continuous adjustments so that you stay in alignment. Think about it just like driving your car. You get it aligned, you go drive it, 90, 180 days later, you have to go back, have it realigned because you use the car. It goes out of alignment through normal use. Same thing with our organizations. Things change, so you have to do that. So again, Jessica mentioned earlier between that I was a consultant, and these old 4 squares are wonderful, wonderful tools. And this is a great one comparing potential to performance, potential on the vertical axis and performance on the horizontal axis. And in the upper right-hand corner, we've got high performance, high potential. Those folks are easy, easy. They're included in your program. In the upper left-hand and lower right-hand corner, these are the folks that you need to talk to. Low performance, high potential. Hey, remember we talked about high potential being really, really important. So you want to explore why there's low performance. High performance but low potential. Remember, potential is a key. But here we have high performers that may be overcoming low potential. Why? How are they doing that? There could be something there that you're missing. Low performance, low potential, you maybe have a mismatch, but these are individuals that you probably would not want to include in succession planning high potential programs. But anyway, really interesting visual way to plot people in your organization around potential compared to performance for inclusion in a program. Jessica, I see another good question from Denise, the difference between replacement planning and succession planning. Succession planning needs to be thought of as a strategic program. Replacement planning can be a happy byproduct of an effective succession planning program. So in other words, if you're building bench strength and doing the right things, you'll find effective replacements through your succession planning program. Does that make sense? So it's sort of a subset of it, okay? So one of the key things that we have to do, and this was the prior slide was a key introduction to it, is deciding whom to groom. Who do we have participate in the program? And again, we want a relentless focus on looking to the future and making sure that we're bringing the right people into the program. And one of the things that you have to make sure that you're staying on top of if we're going to invest this sort of time, energy, money in one of these programs, you want to make sure that you're working with people who are motivated to perform, again, going back to that idea of potential and values. So you also want to look at where they are in terms of performance and looking at how others view individuals. So this is where 360-degree reviews can come in handy. There's a whole range of assessment tools that you can look at this. So when others on the vertical and self-review on the horizontal axis, this is an important way to begin to look at where people plot out on a chart. And again, in the upper right-hand quadrant, these are people that are easy to work with, clear candidates for participation in the program. Lower right-hand corner, this is probably coaching is needed, high self but low others, got some blind spots. Again, you're going to get these slides so you can see the notes on here. If you've got high, others see people performing high, but an individual sees themselves as performing low, you may have other issues going on that may require some coaching and conversations, but again would not be an automatic disqualifier from participating in programs. In the lower left-hand corner, probably would disqualify individuals unless they could improve. So this all gets down to readiness. Are people ready for participation in a high potential or succession planning program? There are really three great ways to sort out whether individuals are ready to participate or not. Using these types of four-square analytical tools based upon a range of self-selection, assessments, and observation is a great way to plot the data. But ultimately, that information is going to be built around, I think, three types of tools. Self-selection. Ask people if they want to participate. You may be surprised at individuals who will raise their hand and say, yes, I would like to be considered for promotion. Folks that you never believed, never really thought were motivated for leadership may come forward. Other people that you thought would be dynamite leaders may never be really motivated to lead others. In either one of those situations, you've got conversations to have. Assessments are really important, values-driven, behavior-driven. You're going to be wanting to assess people's competencies, but the competencies that are necessary for future success. And where are people on their career trajectory? You don't want to be bringing entry-level employees into succession planning programs necessarily, but people have to be at the right stage in their career so they're ready at some point in the next 12, 18, 24 months for that next more complicated level in their career. And observation. We pay our managers and leaders to make informed professional judgments and decisions all the time. So observation is another legitimate way to assess the readiness of individuals to participate. The trick is to bake out the politics, bake out the personalities, and train people to do this objectively and fairly. Jessica, I see a lot more good questions showing up. Is there another one there that we should take?
Yeah, so this question from Bill, it'll actually lead us into the next slide. He asks, are you determining potential before or after assessing? If before, how are you determining the potential? Is that where you're looking for motivation, curiosity, etc.?
You're spot on. And Bill, I'm going to answer your question here right as I go through this slide. I may get to the answer as I go through this. But this is the third of the 5 best practices. You want to look for potential. There was a cover article in the Harvard Business Journal 2 months ago that addressed this exact topic, and it was a brilliant article. But they talked about past experience absolutely not being an indicator of future success and for succession planning. That what we really need to look at is how are employees wired? What are their values? How do they work? What are the things that they bring to the job? Their characteristics, their traits, some of the sort of their core competencies. And these were 4 elements that we can assess, we can look at, we can understand in terms of how they're motivated and sort of how they're wired. And these are the 4 elements that were identified in that great article. Curiosity. And again, going back to the idea of this volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous world, if you think about that world and success in a world where uncertainty and ambiguity are going to sort of rule the day, curious employees are going to be really important, right? Get out there, find out what's going on. Insight, the ability to look at ambiguity and complexity and find common threads and themes and be able to make good decisions. Engagement, people that are highly engaged in what they're doing, makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? But determination, people who are not easily stopped, who find ways around obstacles and still find ways to be successful. These were 4 traits that this author found common in highly successful people, irregardless of experience, irregardless of background. It was those 4 pieces that were great, and those are the things that were identified in this article as indicators of potential. Great stuff. Yeah, there's the paradox of high potentials, another good bit of information. So if you think about these emerging, keep those pieces in mind, and then you think about sort of the competencies that we're beginning to see emerge that are shifting the way we think about the way leaders work. Jessica and I borrowed a little bit from a fabulous book called The 2020 Workplace, written by Gene Meister. On the left-hand side are sort of a traditional approach to leadership competencies. I'm not saying that these aren't important, but on the right-hand side is sort of a new take on leadership competencies. Collaboration, pretty important. Learning agility, which we've seen show up over and over in some really interesting thought leadership as being a competency to really prepare leaders to address this VUCA world. People development, digital literacy, think about innovations and productivity advances, all having their center around digital and technology platforms. I mean, we need leaders that are comfortable in that space. And global citizenship, the ability to understand how what we do fits into a broader context. Interesting approach to leadership and an interesting perspective on leadership that I thought was really interesting. So the fourth of the 5 best practices, and this is relevancy and supports. There's 2 elements to this. One is the relevancy piece. This is that awareness on the part of the participants that, look, this program, if I participate in the program, I'm going to make the clear connection between success in the program and success in the job or my next promotion. Period, end of story. And they will not make the connections themselves. They may, but the odds are not good that they will. We'll see the connection. We've put the program together. For us, it's kind of like, well, of course it's connected, but our employees don't think the same way we do about development. So make the connections for them. Help them understand clearly the standards that you're applying, the requirements of the program, and the competencies that you're asking them to refine and develop and build out. And then the support piece of it, our managers, our frontline managers and supervisors and leaders, they're going to ultimately seal the deal for you. Without their support of the people that we're developing, the program's not going to go anywhere. So you got to provide a framework so that the participants, the people to whom they report, understand how to support what you're doing. Otherwise, it's not going to work. And this is a great quote from that Paradox of High Potentials. Managers need to stretch, challenge, and coach their high potential employees. Without multidimensional dialogue about these issues, managers tend to hold on to their high potential people instead of helping them along an intentional developmental pathway. High potentials then may interpret this as a lack of company support and will be inclined to look elsewhere. The exact opposite of what we want to have happen. So we really need, oh, I'm sorry, I hit the desk. So we really need that manager support to be clear and unequivocal. But again, your managers won't make those connections and they won't understand intuitively how to support the learning and development programs that we build. You're going to have to show them how to do it. You're going to have to show managers how to stretch. You have to teach managers how to challenge, and you may have to develop coaching skills in your managers to, like I said before, seal the deal on effective succession planning in high potential programs. Okay? Oh, good question from Susan. Jessica, I want to take that one now if you don't mind.
Sure. So Susan asks, how do you help managers in current positions understand that we aren't looking to replace them? We just need to have a plan in place in case something happens.
Well, Susan, I wouldn't even phrase it that way. I would phrase it along the terms laid out here. That, look, we have these high potential, highly talented people in our organization. So we have 2 choices with them. We can let them leave because we can communicate to them in nonverbal ways that we're not interested in their development and we're not going to have a future for them here. Or we can find ways for these employees to be highly engaged and really make a contribution to the organization. And that's where we need your help. This isn't about replacing you. This is about making your team stronger and about making your job, Mr. or Ms. Manager, easier. If we can get your employees to perform at a higher level, you and your team will perform at a higher level. It's the old-fashioned, what's in it for me? So communicate to your managers that this isn't a replacement program. This is a performance improvement program for them and their team. So yeah, we have selected individuals to participate, and you're lucky enough to have one of these high potential employees on your team. This reflects really well on you. Let us help you and this employee improve. That's the way to get at it. And so you take it from being a place where it becomes a threat to them, and it becomes viewed as an asset. Rachel has a good deal. We tell them we're building bench strength. That's another way to get at it, and that's another good vocabulary to use. But I like the idea of framing it as, look, this is about helping you and your team improve performance, and here's what's in it for you, kind of a thing. So either way you want to get at it, but the vocabulary can be really important. So then the fifth of the 5 best practices is, if this works the way it should, what we're aiming for here is building a culture where continuous learning isn't the exception, where continuous learning is the norm, where this becomes what's expected, where continuous learning is what everybody does, because this is what we owe each other. In this environment, in this volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous work world, if we're not, as a group, learning continuously, we as a group are going to fall behind the market. Competition is going to go by us. Our jobs are going to be less secure because brighter, more qualified, more talented people are going to come along. So let's all learn. Let's all stay on top. Let's all keep our skills and knowledge and competencies honed and finely tuned and on top of what's required in the marketplace. So here are 5 elements that are typically found in learning cultures. Holistic thinking is exactly what it sounds like, where employees understand sort of how the whole organization fits together and how things work. Learning is integrated into the day-to-day workflow. This gets back to that manager support talked about earlier. Well, there's a high capacity for change in the organization. If you think about what learning and training is really about, it is about change, isn't it? I mean, at its foundation, we're trying to take people from one state of performance, current state, to a desired state of performance, which is better. It's at a higher level, right? So if we can improve or increase the capacity for change, we increase the capacity for learning. Collaboration becomes a critical part of it. Going back to those management competencies, collaboration becomes not only a competency, but an operational norm. People are sharing information and working together to solve problems. And then there's a commitment on the part of all of the employees to learn, a personal commitment. So so those are sort of the characteristics that you'll typically see when you've got a really finely tuned learning culture. And if this works together, these 5 elements, this is a key piece of it. So I want to leave you with a few additional thoughts. Succession planning and high potential development isn't just about identifying new or younger talent. This is about identifying talent at every level of your organization. So, for executives, we're looking for senior directors and vice presidents. For advanced leadership, we're looking at our mid and senior level managers. For managers, we're looking at new managers and newly promoted managers. And for supervisory and team leads, we're looking for high potential employees. And I would add a level to this. We're also wanting to develop those technical employees, architects, engineers, lawyers, who on those teams have the potential for leadership, who there can we help refine their skills and advance in their careers. So don't ignore any particular level of leadership. If you're really going to have a great program that is strategically lined up with organizational goals, you need to approach this, from every level of your organization. And if we think about the various phases of succession planning, it's not something that begins a few months or a year before promotion and then ends after somebody gets promoted. There's a consideration phase, which is, who do we involve? How do we, really kind of narrow the choices down. There's an opportunity for participants to explore what the next more complex role might be like. Then there's the transition from one level of complexity in the role, be it an individual contributor or a supervisor, to that next level up. And then there's the adoption, where you really begin to take on, as a professional identity, that next role. Here's another way of illustrating this. This comes from a really good article called A Succession Plan for First-Time Managers. It appeared in the T&D magazine, the December 2011 issue. And I loved this article for a whole range of reasons, but I really liked that the authors laid out very nicely that best practices in succession planning sort of straddles the promotion, that it begins before promotion and continues well beyond promotion, so that we really help newly promoted individuals or newly promoted professionals really grow into their role, so that succession planning isn't just about consideration and exploration and then the promotion, and we walk away. Succession planning is about ensuring success in that next role. So again, you're going to get a chance to get these slides, but I just thought this was a really wonderful perspective on succession planning, and this is one of the best articles I'd ever seen in terms of really explaining sort of the post-promotion importance of continuing the development of these individuals. So to review our 5 best practices, we want to make sure that our program is aligned with the organization's strategic objectives. And this isn't just a one-and-done thing. By alignment, we mean that each of these steps is being continuously analyzed and reviewed, because we don't necessarily know with a high degree of certainty exactly what the future is going to hold. So we need to be continuously adjusting programs, looking at goals. Are we on track? Are we off track? And adjusting programs so that we can stay where we need to be. We need to analyze our current capabilities, compare them to future capabilities, and figure out ways to fill those gaps. But this is a real bias towards the future. We want to focus on potential with those values really tied in. That was a really wonderful way to get at that. Remember those values of curiosity, insight, engagement, and determination. Really wonderful way to think about identifying the potential in our employees. And then perceived as relevant and real by the participants, which really harkens back to what we learned about adult learning theory. We've got to make sure that the participants understand clearly the connections between their success and their participation in the program. And we need to make sure that we're also clearly lining up the support mechanisms necessary for success, which means that the managers of the participants are prepared to deliver the goods. And last but not least, all of this hopefully leads to a culture of continuous learning and continuous improvement, which will help the employees, leaders, or high potential employees, and by extension the entire organization succeed and work effectively in this marketplace with all this volatility and uncertainty kind of surrounding us all the time. Okay, Jessica, I think we're in pretty good shape for me to take a short break and turn it over to you for a second, and then we'll take some questions. Is that all right?
Yep, sounds good, Chris. So I have a couple of recommended resources here. These are included in the Biz Library collection. So this first one is called a Business Impact course. So it's really interactive. It kind of puts you in the driver's seat. So basically you're presented with these different resources. So things like emails, voicemails, video meetings, and then you make decisions based upon those resources or those things that you're interacting with, and then it'll take you through and say, okay, maybe this wasn't the best decision. Here's some feedback on how you can make it better. And then the second course, this is a short video course that'll help you if you're on your leadership team or your management team really ask the right questions as part of that SWOT analysis and understanding where you are as an organization and where you need to go. So both of these are good resources that I'd recommend to get you started with things. All of those two resources are included in the Biz Library collection. As you're working towards developing a culture of continuous learning, our goal really is to provide you the resources and support that you need to deliver a frictionless learning experience to your leaders and employees across your organization. So if you want to try out any of those courses or any of the other resources included with the Biz Library collection, just let us know. I'll put a quick poll up and you can have a free trial of those resources. All right, Chris, so we had a lot of great questions in today. I'll go ahead, if there's one that you want to start with, we can go with that, or I can also grab one for you as well.
Oh, I was just babbling on there and I was still muted. What was that thing about being technology literate? So you can pick.
All right. This next question comes in from Deborah. She asks, will succession planning create disappointment to those who are groomed but never given the opportunity to get the position? We have low turnover, so advancement opportunities are slim to none.
It can, yes. Yeah, I wish I could tell you that it's not, but yes, it can. So this is where managing expectations and making it clear to people what the purpose of the program is and making it clear to them what their role is going to be in participating, that's why that becomes so incredibly important. So, which is part of why I'm not a big fan of telling people ahead of time, hey, we're grooming you for this specific role or we're grooming you for that specific role. I think it's a much more engaged way to build a program, to couch it more as sort of a high potential development opportunity. Look, you're an employee that we see as having great value to the company long term. We'd like to put you in this special development program, and here's what we're going to do. And if they ask, well, is this a potential for promotion? You say, well, it may lead to that, but we don't want to promise that. So I think you have to manage those expectations up front first. I think a lot has to do with communicating what participation really means second. And third, it has to do with how you approach the program itself while it's going on. So action learning projects, special projects, teams, just a variety of ways that you can couch things as you're going through the program can help blunt any disappointment that might crop up from somebody that's in the program that ultimately doesn't get promoted that was hoping that they might get promoted. But again, you know what? The other part of this you have to look at is if you have a participant that's in the program that does get passed over for a promotion, going back to what Fulmer told us earlier, it's about getting the right people in the right job. You have to go into this clear-headed, expecting that that's going to happen, that some people will not be the right person for those leadership roles, and you may select some of them out. Some may voluntarily select themselves out of the organization, and that's going to be true whether you have a program or not.
All right, so one more question, kind of a situation, what would you do from Yvette related to a manager or supervisor not wanting to lose an employee? So how would you approach this? If someone does their job well and a supervisor wants to move them into another part of the organization for development, but then that's hurting the original department and they don't want to lose them. So how do you get them on board?
Oh boy, that's another naughty one, isn't it?
Therapy session with Chris. No,
did you just save these hard ones for me? Well, this gets back to good coaching on the part of the manager and the learning and development folks, and this gets back to some of what the advice I gave before. This gets down to managing expectations and communicating clearly, and this gets down to some courageous conversations coupled with a high level of emotional intelligence. You have to make sure that people understand that participation in this program is a benefit, is a bit of a reward in a way for high performance, for doing well. We'd like to challenge you. We'd like to find ways to keep this job interesting for you and give you new ways to stretch yourself and new things to learn, one. Two, we can't afford to have this interfere with the performance of the team or the ongoing high performance of your job. So if those things start to get in the way, then those are difficult conversations, but you have to have them. But step back and think about that for a second. If somebody's participating in the program and then you start to see a drop-off on the team or something's happening, what does that tell you about their ability to handle more complicated, more sophisticated roles going forward? That's a pretty good tell that maybe that's beyond them as well. So again, there's a whole range of things going on in that potentially, but it's certainly crying out for some sort of pretty involved conversation there somewhere, some coaching somewhere along the way in there.
All right, great question. For those of you that are attending for HRCI credit, I put a link to the certificate in the chat panel on the right-hand side of your screen. I'll also email out a link to all of today's attendees in a reminder email that you'll receive within 24 hours. Just a reminder that'll come through GoToWebinars, so make sure that the email address isn't going to go to your junk folder. We do these webinars every week, so I hope you'll join us for a future session. All webinars are on our website at bizlibrary.com/webinars. Next week's session is on 5 barriers to effective training programs and how to crush them. So again, thank you so much for attending with us today. Great questions, and thank you, Chris, for presenting.
Thank you all for attending. We really appreciate it and hope to see you on a webinar in the future.